Hi there, everybody. Welcome to this live No CD webinar. This is a chance for anybody who is tuning in to ask any and all questions you might have related to obsessive compulsive disorder. We want those of you out there who are listening and watching right now, whether it's your first time tuning into a live No CD webinar like this, or whether you've been here many, many times, we want you to get as much education as possible on understanding the nature of obsessive compulsive disorder. And we also want to make sure that everybody out there understands that there is highly effective treatment for OCD, meaning wherever you are in your life right now, wherever your loved one with OCD is in their life right now, no matter how bad, scary, or severe things might seem to you, there is hope. There is a chance to get highly effective treatment so you or your loved one could learn how to effectively overcome those OCD symptoms. I'm Taylor Newendorp. I have been practicing as a therapist for, I don't even know, 15, 16 years at this point. And really for the past 10 years, my primary specialty has been focused on helping people with OCD. I have a private practice here in Chicago where I'm based. It's called Chicago Counseling Center. The vast majority of the clients we help in that practice do have a diagnosis of OCD. And I'm also a therapist here at No CD. Along with that, I have the ongoing pleasure of getting to provide training for many of the therapists joining us here in the No CD network. Just so everybody out there knows, before I start to take your questions, No CD is able to offer telehealth services to provide you with effective treatment with an OCD specialist anywhere in the 50 United States, and that would include Washington, D.C. And we've started offering services in areas of the United Kingdom as well. So here's how it goes. Do not hesitate to ask any and all questions you might have. There's no such thing as a bad question, no such thing as a right or wrong question. I will do my best to answer the questions I'm able to get to as thoroughly as possible because, again, it's important to me, it's important to everybody in the organization here at NoCD that you understand the nature of OCD and how to learn how to effectively manage it and overcome it. So we've already got questions rolling in. Keep asking, please. I'll just kind of go down the line as they pop up for me and do my best to provide clear responses for you. So first one right off the bat, my fear is schizophrenia. Is it possible for OCD to latch onto stories that I've read about schizophrenia? Yes, it is. This seems to make me question every one of my thoughts to see if I believe them. So I'll say a few things about this right off the bat. So we often say that OCD is highly suggestible. The nature of OCD is really characterized by doubt and fear. It's just the way the disorder works. It continually produces intrusive thoughts, images, and urges that make the person feel overcome with doubt. And there's so much doubt and uncertainty that feels really uncomfortable. That usually induces anxiety and fear. So along with that, anything that the person with OCD learns about that seems a littlest bit scary or frightening, the OCD could in fact try and latch onto it, just the way you asked it right here. Here is the thing. There seem to be relatively common underlying fears that many people with OCD do experience. And obviously, everybody is a little bit different. And one of the nice things about working with an OCD specialist through NoCD is that we will focus on your specific individual symptoms. Along with that, we're going to help you identify some possible underlying fears. One of the more common underlying fears we hear people with OCD talk about time and time again is somehow, some way, losing control. Sometimes this gets attached to other types of mental health issues and behavioral health issues, and schizophrenia would certainly qualify. I could understand if you've learned some about schizophrenia, you've read about what people tend to experience as far as the symptoms that go along with schizophrenia. It can sound frightening, and it certainly is. It is very anxiety provoking, very distressing for the person living with schizophrenia as well. So along with that, there's a chance, I don't know, but there's a chance your OCD could be trying to dig into some deeper fear that if you were to develop schizophrenia, that would translate to a loss of control. I cannot even tell you how many times we hear people say things like, I am afraid these obsessions, I am afraid these doubts mean that I'm losing my mind. I'm going to snap. I'm going to lose control at some point. So this questioning you mentioned, questioning thought after thought after thought, that is part and parcel of OCD. And many times we do consider excessive questioning if you feel like you're always analyzing thoughts, analyzing details of stories you've read about schizophrenia or other type of psychiatric issue, whatever it may be, and you're always trying to figure everything out. That is actually what we would call a mental compulsion, a mental ritual. So if you were to work with an OCD specialist, and maybe you have at some point in your life, we would focus on targeting those types of compulsions, whether it's an outward physical compulsion or a mental ritual that you're doing in response to the doubt and fear that go along with the OCD as well. And once you learn through exposure and response prevention, ERP, that you can in fact teach yourself to reduce and eventually resist your compulsions, more often than not, you will learn that that distress associated with those initial obsessive doubts does tend to fade on its own without you engaging in a compulsion. So in case any of you out there tuning in aren't aware of this, this is where the name NoCD comes from. It stands for the No Compulsions Disorder. And time again, this is what we are going to work on with you when you're living with OCD. We're going to teach you to specifically identify your compulsions that are actually perpetuating a lot of the discomfort and doubt you might be experiencing, and really target those compulsions. So like I said, you can teach yourself to stop them. I know it probably sounds impossible, or at the very least daunting to many of you at this point, but it is possible. So if it helps at all, we are hearing more and more people with OCD describe fears along these lines, that they will somehow develop another type of psychiatric disorder. And there certainly are people living with OCD who would meet criteria for other psychiatric disorders as well. In a way, this can become a trick of the OCD, though, meaning, I'm not saying this is happening for you specifically, but this could happen for some of you out there. What this means is that the OCD might start to try and trick you and make you fear that what you're living with is not OCD, and that it's something more than OCD, along the lines of schizophrenia, panic disorder, or just having panic attacks in general, experiencing an episode of derealization or depersonalization, or anything along the lines of what will qualify as a psychotic feature, something like active hallucinations and delusions and that sort of thing. So again, if you haven't received help for your OCD symptoms yet, please reach out. I can tell you, if you're to see an OCD specialist through NoCD, we'll do a very thorough assessment, and we will be able to tell you with great confidence whether or not you meet criteria for OCD and whether or not you meet criteria for any other types of psychiatric disorders as well. And we could help work you through that process. But what you're describing here, as far as having a fear of schizophrenia, this is not to provide reassurance, but that doesn't sound like schizophrenia. It just sounds like a fear that this could be something that might occur to you. I understand that would create more uncertainty and more doubt, but that doesn't mean it's happening. It also doesn't mean you have to question those thoughts and analyze those thoughts to get an answer. This is another trick of OCD. It often tells people they need to find some sort of solution. They need to find some sort of answer to a problem that is not actually a problem. It's just an intrusive thought, image, urge, or doubt that the OCD itself has produced in the first place. All right, so hopefully that helped out just a little bit. I'm going to do my best to scroll through these. We have so many questions rolling in already. Okay. Okay. I have been suffering from sensory motor OCD for years. This OCD is the least talked about subtype. Can it be treated or not? If yes, how is it treated? I would agree with that. I actually think that there is not enough research on sensory motor OCD. There's not enough information out there about sensory motor OCD. We don't hear enough about it. a lot of people out there living with sensory motor OCD experience some level of frustration because they can't find resources on it. But here is the good news. Sensory motor OCD is completely treatable. Any type, any subtype of OCD, all themes that go along with OCD are treatable. So as far as how is it treated, the answer would be exposure and response prevention. So if it helps for those of you out there who aren't clear on what this is, many times with sensory motor OCD, the obsessive focus can get kind of attached, if you will, to an automatic bodily function or bodily process that we as human beings just go through. These are things our brain and our body does for us. Common examples would be an obsessive fixation on things like blinking, breathing, maybe even the act of swallowing, and those sorts of things. This can then create fears. Am I breathing correctly? Am I blinking enough? Did I swallow just right? All of those fears, again, products of the OCD. It may feel very intense. We often hear people say in the moment, it feels so real. It feels very real, as if this is some sort of actual threat, that I could actually forget how to breathe, or I could just stop blinking at some point. But here's the thing. It is yet another nasty trick of the OCD. It's trying to convince you something that is not going to happen and cannot happen, could potentially happen, and it might come true. Therefore, you have to remain in a state of high alert. You're kind of in this hyper aware state, always paying attention to those kinds of automatic bodily functions, even physical or physiological sensations, always scanning, trying to make sure everything's okay, everything is working correctly. Your body and brain are in fact functioning the way they're designed to, right? But here's one of the traps of OCD. You're looking for something to be wrong when nothing was wrong in the first place. When these obsessions come into the person's mind, more often than not, they're misinterpreted as some sort of actual threat. The OCD itself is trying to tell you that you're in danger when none of that is actually happening. But we understand it's so powerful. There's such an intense emotional reaction to that in the moment. It is really, really hard to sit back, remind yourself, and commit yourself, oh, there is no risk, there is no danger, there is no threat. So if it helps, I personally have worked with numerous people with sensory motor OCD. I know many of my colleagues here at NoCD have as well. It is just as treatable as any form of OCD out there. If you have not reached out and tried to work with an OCD specialist yet, please do. You can even whittle down your search until you find someone who is well experienced in treating sensory motor OCD specifically, and you can get the help you need. ERP is just as effective for sensory motor OCD as it is for any other form of OCD out there. Okay, is suicide OCD a desire to escape or be non-existent? Excellent question. So again, for those of you that may not be too familiar with suicide OCD, there is a very common theme, a very common type of OCD we are aware of that is generally referred to as harm OCD. Within that, there is a subtype of harm OCD that is often called either self-harm OCD or suicide OCD. Many times, this is characterized by the person having these recurrent, persistent thoughts or images that they will somehow hurt or kill themselves. So is suicide OCD a desire to escape or be non-existent? No. I would say an underlying theme of suicide OCD is that you are afraid that you desire to escape or be non-existent. So this is what happens time and time again. It comes back to what I was just mentioning. The brain is misinterpreting these types of obsessions as some sort of a threat. And along with that, thoughts can be confused for intentions. Thoughts and images, even urges, can be confused for desires. But here's the thing, if you truly desire something, it feels good to you. you'd be looking forward to it. It sounds exciting, pleasurable to you. If it's suicide OCD, it's not a desire, it's a fear that you might desire to escape or be non-existent. Because my guess is with those types of obsessive doubts that go along with suicide OCD, it doesn't seem like a good idea. It doesn't seem exciting or pleasurable. So that's a key difference to help you determine between what is an actual true desire, what is some sort of want in your life, versus what is actually just an obsession. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that started to help out a little bit as well. Why do I have OCD mostly at nighttime and during the day? Does that mean all day and all night? Most people will describe when they're struggling with OCD at heightened levels of severity that it feels almost ever present. And I certainly understand that. Mostly at night, hard to know. I can tell you what we hear time and time again. People notice an increase in discomfort and anxiety at two key points, either right at the end of the day, especially when they're trying to get to sleep, and then the OCD comes in and kind of messes with their ability to fall asleep in the first place, or unfortunately, first thing in the morning, right when they wake up, boom, obsessions are there, discomfort is there. The desire, the urge to engage in some sort of compulsion to get relief in that moment could already be there from the moment you wake up. As far as why that occurs, honestly, we can't answer that for you. We can't tell you that. Some theories would be that later in the day, if it's getting closer to nighttime, your body and brain are pretty worn down, right? You're probably tired from living with OCD anyway. Pretty much everybody I've ever known with OCD, everybody I've helped with OCD, describes this ongoing state of exhaustion. We understand that OCD itself is draining. It saps your physical, emotional, and mental energy. And at the end of a long day, your body and brain are tired anyway. And unfortunately, when you're feeling tired or run down, it is so much harder to manage your thoughts with or without OCD. I can tell you for myself, when I lie down at night and all I want to do is desperately fall asleep because I'm so wiped out, that's when my brain starts running wild. I think about everything that happened that day. I think about things I got to do the next day. And it is so hard to control that process. It just kind of goes all over the place. And unfortunately, that can be intensified when you're living with OCD as well. And then for some people, it's the opposite effect. It's after they've gotten some rest and the brain is very well rested. And then as soon as they wake up, the brain is very well rested and very active as well. And then it can feel like the OCD is on hyperdrive as well. So there's no set answer to a question like this because everybody's a little bit different. But we do know this, again, if you're feeling tired, run down during times when you're sick, during times when you are stressed about other things going on in your life apart from the OCD, most people report that their OCD symptoms get more intense in those moments. All right, are sexual urges common with OCD? Short answer, yes. And this can come out in numerous different forms. So there are people who struggle with a subtype of OCD known as sexual orientation OCD. They have a pretty good idea of what their actual sexual orientation is. Actually, they usually know what their sexual orientation is, but there's this intrusive doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if I am actually of another sexual orientation and I just don't fully know it, or I just haven't fully realized it yet? Many people struggling with that type of OCD do report sexual urges. Keep in mind, obsessions come in a few different forms for people. I think most people think of obsessions as being intrusive thoughts, and that might very well be the most common form of an obsession. But you can certainly experience intrusive unwanted images and intrusive unwanted urges as well. Another time we hear people talking about sexual urges as a form of an obsession would be with what is known as pedophilia OCD. We often call it POCD. This tends to be highly distressing for people as well. These are not people who have any actual desire to commit some sort of sexual act with a child, a minor of any kind. But the OCD itself produces so much doubt, it can feel like an urge, as if you are about to do something that you really, really do not want to do. So long answer short, yes, those types of urges are common. I would highly recommend working with an OCD specialist. Yet again, you can get a diagnostic assessment done with a specialist at NoCD, and they can help you start to determine what urges would fall in line with OCD and what might be different, if anything. So time and time again, I know I'm going to keep making the same recommendation. Find an OCD specialist. Find someone who understands the nature of the disorder and all the different ways that its symptoms can manifest and present themselves, and find someone that knows what they're doing so they can help you address your specific symptoms. Okay. I've never been diagnosed before, but I'm pretty sure I have it. Back in October, I had intrusive thoughts about turning homosexual and living that lifestyle. I've never been attracted to a man. This is what I was just talking about with sexual orientation OCD. Without knowing you at all, just reading the way you wrote that, that does sound like OCD. You never been diagnosed? It's worth it. Schedule a call with NoCD. Talk to somebody who knows their stuff and can give you some more definitive answers. And what you're touching on here is also what I was mentioning just a couple minutes ago. I often hear people I'm working with OCD describe kind of this dichotomy that exists in their brain. And they can say in one breath, kind of what you're just saying. I've never been attracted to a man. I know I'm heterosexual, but what if? That is what so many intrusive thoughts, urges, and doubts are characterized. What if? What if I got it wrong? What if I am wrong? What if? Totally a product of OCD and anxiety. Never been diagnosed, I'd reach out, get some help. You can learn how to manage that really, really effectively. I have health OCD. It feels so real that I will faint and lose control over myself. Please help. I can't leave home alone. Again, I know I'm getting repetitive already, but it bears repeating. You want help? Reach out to NoCD. We have people literally all over the country with availability to help you with what you were describing. Health OCD, as distressing as any other form of OCD. Like you just said, it feels so real, right? It feels like you will faint. It feels like you will lose control over yourself. That comes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the webinar. This is a relatively common underlying fear for a lot of people with OCD. Physically, mentally, or both, I'm just going to lose control somehow. That rarely, if ever, happens to people. It simply does not happen as much and with as much intensity as the OCD would try and convince you. So please reach out. We have people who can help you. We can point you in the right direction. Health OCD as well, very treatable. ERP works for any form of OCD. I keep failing at my ERP homework and it's getting me down. I have small successes, but the big things make me think I'm messing up so bad I need to start the process all over again. Is this normal? Totally, totally normal. I can't think of a single person I've ever worked with OCD that hasn't described something along these lines. So here's the thing. Be really careful about what you're telling yourself about yourself. Be really careful about what you're telling yourself about the work you're doing to try and manage OCD. OCD itself is producing enough crap, pardon my language, in your life. You getting down on yourself, criticizing yourself, beating yourself up is not going to help. In fact, it's only going to make things worse. Think about it. If it wasn't you, if it was somebody else in life trying to help you with something, trying to help you work on your ERP homework, for example, are you going to respond better to that person if they're being really critical of your efforts? If they're really being mean to you, they're putting you down, they're telling you have failed? Or do you think you might respond a little bit better and be more encouraged to keep going and doing this difficult work that goes along with ERP if that other person was trying to lift you up, not judging you negatively for times you don't get the ERP done the way you'd prefer it to. Continually, in an empathetic manner, reminding you that you can handle this, you can overcome this, because millions of people do. So think about how you'd want somebody else in your life to talk to you. Would you want a critic, or would you want more of a coach, right? You have to talk to yourself the same way. If you would respond better to a coach who's encouraging and positive and is not putting you down or judging you negatively for stumbles and trip ups and slip ups you might have, then please, please don't talk down to yourself. It's not going to help. It just furthers anxiety. It furthers depression, as you're kind of describing here. Don't give up. This takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of consistency day in and day out. But you have to trust me. It's totally possible to learn how to overcome this thing. If you're not working with an OCD specialist, please find one. NoCD is a great organization to help you with that. In addition to having OCD specialists, we also have these amazing peer advisors on our staff as well. You may have heard some of them speaking in the other webinars we offer, right? These are people like you with OCD. These are people who have gone through treatment. They've done CBT, they've done ERP. They will be able to relate to what you were describing here, and they would be happy to talk to you about your experiences, and again, provide you with ongoing encouragement and empathy and gentle, friendly reminders that you're capable of managing this, because you really are. Okay. I know everyone with OCD says, but it feels so real. It truly does feel incredibly real. Any advice or tips to help stop doing mental compulsions of analyzing and trying to make sense of these urges? It's tough. People really get tripped up with mental rituals, right? And I will say this, everybody's a little bit different. That's my caveat for most of my responses here. But by and large, what we hear from people with OCD time and time again is that it is in fact easier for them to learn how to resist and eventually stop their outward physical compulsions. But these mental compulsions kind of linger. And what I'm hearing in the way you ask this is you're still operating on this belief that when you have a thought, when you have an intense feeling, whether it's a physiological feeling or an emotion, you're still operating on this belief that when that stuff occurs, you have to do something about it. Well, it's got to mean something, right? This doesn't just happen. It must mean something. So I have to make sense of it. That is the trap of the OCD. Your thoughts, your feelings do not actually have to mean anything unless you, as the human being, are the one attaching meaning to it. We have anywhere from 4,000 to 60,000 different thoughts over the course of one day, every day of our lives, right? How can all of that mean something? It is the most natural human experience to have a wide range of emotions at varying levels of intensity over the course of one day. How can every single one of those feelings mean something? People get urges all the time. People without OCD describe what qualify as intrusive urges. The most common examples we hear from people without OCD are things like they're driving over a bridge or they're walking over a bridge and they get this urge that they're going to drive over the side or jump over the side of the bridge. Doesn't have to mean anything. It doesn't mean the person wants to do that. It doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of time figuring out what it all means that an urge like that overcame you. It just happens. The human brain is very complicated. It's kind of weird. I'm not going to lie. There's no way we're always going to be explaining the things that happen to us. With OCD, it doesn't matter how much you try and analyze a thought, image, or urge. It doesn't matter how much you try and make sense of a thought, image, or urge. It's never going to be enough for the OCD anyway. So why even try? I know that's like a billion times easier said than done, just stopping mental rituals. It's really, really hard to do, and I appreciate that. So here is something I often go over with people when I'm working with them, trying out CBT and ERP, right? OCD is right here. It's right here in your face. It's throwing all this crap at you all the time. And as it's doing that, it's trying to make you think that there's something else to look for. I got to look somewhere else to explain this. I got to figure out why this is happening. What is going on? But the answer's right in front of your face the whole time. It's the OCD. Why are you having those thoughts, images, and urges at that kind of intensity? It's the OCD. And again, even people without OCD have these kinds of thoughts, images, and urges. But with OCD, the answer is right in front of your face. It is the OCD. But the same trick of the OCD is it's going to have you look everywhere else for some other possible explanation other than the answer that is right there in front of your face. So I hope that helps to some degree. I do appreciate that resisting and reducing mental compulsions can be really, really challenging. What I often talk to people about is, it's not realistic to always stop this stuff before it starts, especially when it's a mental process that your brain has kind of gotten used to slipping into. Maybe your best bet is once you are aware of the fact that you're caught up in that mental ritual of trying to analyze everything and try and figure everything out. Once that enters your awareness, take a step back and maybe give yourself a gentle reminder. I'm not going to try and figure this out. Maybe it means something, maybe not. I'm going to live with the uncertainty and move on. I'm sure the brain will want to come back, maybe even in the next moment, and try and make some sense of it again. This takes a lot of mental effort. It's up to you to keep redirecting your focus so you're keeping yourself out of a mental compulsion. Maybe it means something, maybe not. It's not worth trying to figure out right now. What's something meaningful and important I can do with myself right now? That's just one quick tip. And again, like I've said to everybody so far, if you haven't worked with an OCD specialist yet, try it out. Okay. Whenever I see or hear the word hell, I cannot think of those close to me or something bad will happen. I have to replace the word by saying heaven or I get anxious. Okay. This happens with OCD, right? It can be a singular word that triggers this discomfort and anxiety and sets off additional doubts and fears, right? It can be a sentence. Again, like we've talked about, it could be an image, a picture, a memory, right? Almost anything can start to set off this obsessive compulsive process. And then over time, the OCD kind of learns what gets you the most, right? It could throw a bunch of words at you. You could be just thinking a bunch of random words and they have little to no impact on you. But then one word stands out, hell. And as soon as you fall into some compulsive response to a word like that, the OCD catches on. All right. Yep. This is the one that seems like a threat. So I'm going to keep throwing it at them over and over and over again. I know this isn't really like clinical terminology, but in my experience, many people with OCD kind of understand this when we describe it this way. There is something about the nature of this disorder. It really has a tendency to go after and kind of attack things that are really important and meaningful to you, right? So obviously, the people close to you are important to you. They mean everything to you. Of course, you don't want something bad to happen to them, right? At some point, the word hell came into your mind, unwittingly, no fault of your own. You made this attachment to that word, somehow potentially posing some threat of danger to family, loved ones, right? Whatever it may be. And then once OCD saw that, I was like, yep, I got him. It's going to keep throwing a word like that. It's going to keep throwing a fear like that at you as much as it can. OCD wants to stick around. It wants to pester you, harass you, bully you as much as possible. So here's an important thing, right? You are saying you have to replace the word by saying heaven or you get anxious. That's what the OCD wants you to believe. I have to do this. I have to. The only way to get rid of my anxiety is to say the word heaven. Here's the trap, though. Every single time you do this, every time you're saying heaven to neutralize or get rid of the word hell, you are treating that very word, hell, as a threat even more and more and more. And again, this is the trap people get stuck in. It is nobody's fault. It's the way OCD works. The more you are responding to any kind of trigger with a compulsion so you can alleviate that anxiety, you're actually treating that trigger as a bigger and bigger and bigger risk when it was never a risk. It was never a danger in the first place. So here's the key thing. If you're going to do ERP for OCD, and I highly recommend it, it is the most effective form of treatment for OCD out there. Why not try it? Why not give yourself a chance to overcome this? But if you're going to choose to try ERP to overcome OCD, you have to dig down deep and simply have the willingness and the motivation and the determination to live with some anxiety. The harder you're trying to stop anxiety, the harder you're trying to get rid of anxiety, you are making that feeling of anxiety itself seem like a bigger and bigger and bigger threat. Anxiety as a feeling sucks. Nobody likes it, but it can't actually do anything to you. Feeling anxious in a moment is uncomfortable. Feeling anxious for minutes at a time, hours at a time, more often than not over the course of a day, it's uncomfortable. But that feeling can't actually do anything to you. So if I were working with you, we would work up to this. This wouldn't be something we throw you into right off the bat, because that's not how ERP works. It's not really effective when we try it that way. But we would work up to exposures where you would be purposely thinking the word hell, purposely reading the word hell, purposely saying it out loud to other people, saying it to me as your therapist. And when you would notice that urge to say the word heaven, to get rid of the word hell, to kind of neutralize it, push it out of your mind, right? Yeah, you would resist it. Make every attempt to resist trying to replace that quote unquote bad word with a good or safe word, right? I know it sounds challenging. It probably sounds scary, but here's what you could learn. The more you're purposely focusing on a trigger of any kind, the word hell, for example, and the more you're actively resisting engaging in a compulsive response, you're going to feel some discomfort. But what you'll probably notice is that anxiety is going to rise, and then at some point it's going to hit a peak. It's going to kind of break and start to come down on its own without you having neutralized that initial trigger word. That is how ERP works. That is how new learning starts to occur in the brain. When you stop doing your compulsions in direct response to obsessions, and when you stop doing your compulsions to get immediate relief from that discomfort, your brain starts to learn, oh, yeah, I guess none of this was a threat in the first place after all. That's what you want to achieve, and it's totally doable with ERP, I promise you. All right, let me see what else we got here. Okay. Fight and flight kicks in. I can't think, forget everything, and need to run, no matter how much I prepare. All right, you're talking about the fight, flight, or freeze response in our brain. Okay, this is a great point. I'm glad you brought this up, and I know what you're talking about. When that anxiety response, that natural anxiety response that all human beings possess in our brains kicks in, it is really hard to think about anything else. It's really hard to rationalize your way through a moment. So bear with me while I nerd out for a second and explain a little bit about how OCD actually functions in the brain. So there's an area of our brain that is often referred to as either the midbrain or the reptilian brain. I've had many clients I've worked with over the years kind of get a little kick out of calling it their lizard brain, right? This is the area of our brain that houses that fight, flight, or freeze response. Again, this is a natural response. We are supposed to have that fight, flight, or freeze response housed in our brain. So if and when we are actually in danger, when we are truly at risk of having some sort of physical harm inflicted upon us, that response kicks in so we can literally fight it, flee, run away from it, or freeze, kind of play dead. It's what possums do, right? That's the freeze response in the possum's brain. They play dead. The predator that was about to attack them goes about their business and leaves them alone, right? These are natural responses our brain has developed to help keep us alive and help keep us safe when we're actually in danger. Here is the trick of OCD. What we have learned is that obsessions occur in that same midbrain region. Obsessions also occur in our reptilian brain. What that means is you can experience an intrusive thought, image, urge, or doubt, and almost as it's occurring, or immediately after it's occurred, it has set off that fight, flight, or freeze response. So all that is to say, you can experience an obsession, a corresponding anxious emotional reaction to it, and have that urge to seek safety before any information reaches our cortex, which is where higher order cognitions occur in the brain. That's the area of our brain that allows us to rationalize things. It allows us to sit back and think about what's happening in a moment, think about the way in which we're thinking about things, right? But because an obsession occurs in the midbrain and kind of kicks off that fight or flight response, it is so hard to rationalize things. So you can prepare as much as you want time and time again. And unfortunately, with OCD, there will continue to be times when an obsession is produced in that area of the brain. It's really intense. It sets off that fight, flight, or freeze response, and you are simply not in a rational enough state of mind to pause and remind yourself, wait a second, maybe there's no danger here. Maybe there's no reason to seek safety in the first place. So I will try and minimize my continued nerding out right now, but here's how ERP works. And again, I understand for people who haven't been through ERP and only kind of have a cursory understanding of it, it sounds kind of scary. But it's necessary for you to experience some discomfort for your brain to engage in new learning. So with exposure and response prevention, you are actually going to purposely face obsessions, any kind of trigger. We're actually trying to set off that anxious response. But here's where things get different. Once the trigger is there and you're focused on it, once you're feeling some anxiety and discomfort, you're going to work on preventing your typical response. Because if your typical response is to seek safety, meaning you're trying to avoid the trigger, you're trying to seek a bunch of reassurance from someone else around you that everything's all right, you're trying to distract yourself from it, you're engaging in any kind of compulsion, physical or mental, these are all efforts to seek safety in the moment. Every time you're doing that, you're perpetuating this false idea that you were unsafe in the first place. So with ERP, when you're exposed, purposely exposed to a trigger, and you purposely set off that anxious response, but you resist the compulsion, you resist the safety seeking, it is that behavioral change done consistently enough, day in and day out, that the brain starts to see, oh, there was no reason to seek safety in the first place. So I know I kind of went off on a tangent there. Hopefully that'll make sense. Hopefully it does help to some degree. And just to make sure I really sound like a broken record here, if you have not already, seek out an OCD specialist. Try ERP. It works so well. Continues to boggle my mind. As a therapist using this mode of treatment for 10 years, it continues to astound me how effective this form of treatment is. Okay. I keep getting intrusive thoughts whenever I think of a family member that just died. I'm sorry for your loss. I don't believe in the thoughts, but it's frustrating how often the thoughts come in. How do I get rid of it? Again, very sorry for your loss. Your last sentence really kind of encapsulates what most people with OCD are hoping for. How do I get rid of my thoughts? How do I get rid of anxiety? I am not saying this to be discouraging at all, but I'm a straight shooter. I'm going to be honest with you. You can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of thoughts. Like I just said, you're experiencing anywhere from 4,000 to 60,000 thoughts over the course of a day. How are you going to get rid of all those? How are you even going to get rid of a few of them? It is literally impossible. How are you going to get rid of feelings? You're a human being. You were born, designed to experience emotions. You are not going to get rid of this stuff. So here is another kind of unfortunate trap of living with OCD and anxiety. The harder you're trying to get rid of a thought, you're actually making it more likely that that very thought is going to occur more and more and more and more. So if you've tuned into these webinars in the past, you have probably had the pleasure of hearing NoCD's head of clinical services, Dr. Patrick McGrath, talk about the pink elephant, right? This is actually a therapeutic exercise we use with people in ERP. It could be a pink elephant, it could be a white bear. You pick any color and any animal, it's still going to be the same, right? It comes back to this idea that the harder you're trying to stop a thought or get rid of it, the more likely it is it's going to stay in your brain. So what happens to all of you out there right now if I were to tell you, don't think of a pink elephant? Don't think of a pink elephant. Don't picture a pink elephant. And if you've already started thinking of a pink elephant, stop. Stop thinking about a pink elephant. I don't know. I can't hear you right now, but my guess would be most of you are thinking about a pink elephant. I know I am. The harder you're trying to get rid of a thought, the harder you're trying to stop something, you're keeping that very thing very much alive in your brain. So stop trying to stop it. Allow the thought to be there. I'm sure it's not pleasant, right? You know, this is attached to a really unfortunate event that's just occurred in your life. Nobody likes intrusive thoughts. You don't have to like them, but you can allow them to be there. And here is what tends to happen. The more you accept thoughts, images, and urges, whatever they may be, the more you simply acknowledge them and allow them to be there in your brain without trying to push them away or seek relief. Guess what? They're then more likely to fade out of your mind more quickly. So stop trying to stop thoughts. It's not going to work. It's going to make things worse for you. Okay. Can you elaborate on how OCD affects academic writing and academic reading? I'm particularly interested in the tendency for sufferers to agonize over each sentence while writing their school papers. Thank you for bringing this up. We have seen so many students of all ages, at all levels of academia, describe these exact types of compulsions. It can happen with pretty much any form of OCD. We tend to see it the most with what is often known as just right OCD or perfectionism OCD. That's driven by this obsessive urge to have everything seem, feel, or look, or even sound just right or perfect. There's usually some sense of responsibility tied in there. I don't want to be the person that's responsible for making an error or getting something wrong. I don't want to be responsible for missing something. This certainly applies to academics. Oh, I'm supposed to study this material. I feel like I have to remember it all 100% perfectly. I don't want to be responsible for not remembering everything. I have to write a paper. Oh, okay. I have to write it perfectly. Every word, every sentence, every paragraph, the way the whole thing is structured together, it all has to feel just right. I don't want to be responsible for missing something, getting it wrong, making a mistake, and then maybe getting a bad grade or whatever the feared result is, right? So this is where people get stuck. Compulsively writing, rewriting, re-editing over and over and over again. Same thing with reading. Oh, I have to understand this perfectly. I have to understand this sentence. I can never forget this sentence. It's so important. Oh, and the next sentence, it's just as important as the one before it. Everything feels like it's of equal importance, and everything feels like it's the most important thing all the time. So here's the thing. In order to reduce your own agony, as you described it, and that's a great word. I've heard so many people use the same thing. I am agonizing over this, right? Compulsions are not pleasurable. They're not enjoyable. Compulsions suck. They're just a means to an end, right? You're going through a compulsive process, just hoping to get that just right feeling. Okay, now it feels perfect. Whew, now I can move on. Now I've got some sense of relief. Now I feel safe, whatever it may be. But you and so many people I know with OCD would say that going through that compulsive process does not feel good. You're just simply trying to get that end result. But as you probably already know with OCD, that relief you might get, that sense that things are good enough or complete, it never lasts, right? That's one of the many traps of OCD. An obsessive doubt, urge, image, whatever, it's going to come back at some point anyway. So this is why we say compulsions don't work. No matter what you do, it's never going to be enough for the OCD anyway. So this is a great example of a pretty straightforward yet agonizing compulsion that you could work on gradually resisting, gradually reducing until the point where maybe you're not stuck so long rereading, rewriting, re-editing, all that kind of stuff. So I'll be honest with you. This would probably involve doing things that feel incomplete. And then your job is just to tolerate that sense of incompleteness. Maybe you haven't gotten something exactly right. Maybe you have missed some information. Maybe you spelled some things wrong, right? Maybe you totally missed the mark in the paper you're trying to write. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Here's the problem with OCD and anxiety in general. People get so stuck in the fear, sometimes they're not able to think past that. Let's say this fear comes true. You are somehow responsible for making a bunch of egregious errors in some paper you've written. You are, in fact, responsible for missing something you were supposed to study or read, right? You get stuck in that fear. What if? What if? What if it's not just right? What if I don't get it perfect? Then what? What happens after that? Let's say you do get some stuff wrong. Let's say you do miss some information. What is the worst thing that's going to happen? Now, I'm sure the OCD is going to throw all different kinds of worst case scenarios and catastrophes at you. Oh my God, then I'll fail this class, then I'll be kicked out of school altogether, and then I'm going to be ostracized by my classmates and friends and family and professors, and I'll never get a good job, and I'll wind up miserable and alone forever, right? I could totally see the OCD going there. How likely is that, though? Is there a chance that could happen? Maybe, probably, but it's probably a very, very, very slight chance. Is it highly likely that that feared catastrophe is actually going to come true if you miss some information? If you don't compulsively rewrite the same sentence over and over again? It doesn't seem highly likely to me. And here's the bottom line. Let's say some of those fears came true. Chances are you could still handle it, right? I know so many people with OCD simply don't give themselves the opportunity to teach themselves that you are capable of handling discomfort. You are capable of tolerating anxiety. You are capable of getting a bunch of stuff wrong, making all kinds of errors, and still moving on with your life. It doesn't have to be a life and death decision as to whether or not this is the best paper ever written in the history of academia. It doesn't have to be a life or death decision when it comes to, do I read this paragraph one more time, right? There's no way everything you're studying, reading, and writing about is of equal importance, and it's all at that 100% maximum level of importance all the time. I know it sounds risky. I know it sounds scary. When you are working on overcoming OCD, and this is what we do through ERP, you do things that might feel risky so you can then learn there wasn't a risk in the first place. Or if there was, it was minimal. It's this a tiny little fraction of a risk. When the OCD is trying to convince you, it would be the worst thing ever. So hopefully that helps some. I can tell you, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is an incredibly common compulsive process we hear people talking about, especially when it comes to academic works. Okay. I see you have another questions about exposures related to this. So I'll put that question up here too. Can you name a few of the exposures you've assigned to students who are dealing with these academic related OCD manifestations? Sure. We'd probably work up to this once again, but I would actually have them do things like put a time limit on how long they are reading a passage in some sort of text they're responsible for studying. I would do this in session with them. And here is how it tends to go, right? You want to identify the obsessive fear first. We want to know what we're targeting with the exposure itself. So maybe the obsessive fear is along the lines, if I don't remember this perfectly, I'll fail out of school, right? So that's the obsessive fear. We're going to target that with the exposure. And then we have to be really clear on what the compulsive process is, the compulsive reaction to that obsessive fear is, because that's what we're going to target with the response prevention. So in this case, maybe the compulsive reaction is then I reread the same paragraph for 10 minutes every time just to make sure I got it all right. Okay, so the obsessive fear, I have to remember it all perfectly or else I'll fail out of school. Compulsive response, reread it for 10 minutes. Then I'll know it all perfectly. Or keep rereading until it feels just right, whatever it may be. I would put a time limit on it. Okay, you've got 1 minute to scan through that paragraph, and then you're going to put the book down, right? The point here is you are purposely setting some parameters around how long that compulsive process could go on, especially, I don't know if this is the case for you, but especially if it's tied to any of these just right perfectionistic tendencies. This is so tricky with OCD. Just keep doing the thing until it feels just right. With OCD, sometimes that takes seconds, sometimes it takes hours, right? The idea here would be stop yourself short of achieving that just right feeling. So if you're used to reading one paragraph, one passage out of a text for 10 minutes every time, limit it to 1 minute, stop yourself short of achieving that just right feeling. And then you literally sit there and deal with the discomfort. It doesn't matter how strong your urge is to go back and look at it one more time. If I could just read one more sentence out of the paragraph, could I do that? It doesn't matter how strong the urge is. You resist it. You actively resist your typical response until your discomfort around it starts to fade. And then you start to learn this was not as dire as the OCD made it out to be in the first place. It's not as necessary as the OCD made it out to be in the first place. You can easily try this with writing as well. So I've had people do exposures where they are writing sentences and they purposely make some mistakes in it. They know they've spelled things wrong. They know they've gotten their facts really, really off, right? And then they let other people read it. So other people are aware of the fact that you're responsible for getting something wrong. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good, but you want to prevent the typical response, which would be to go back and correct the sentence. Or maybe the compulsive response is to apologize for writing a sentence that had some errors in it. Or maybe you really want to explain it clearly to other people. Maybe you want to explain it to your therapist even. Hey, I just want to make sure you know I only misspelled that word because you told me to for an exposure. As soon as you've done that, you've kind of undone the effects of the exposure. And if you're working with me, I'd ask you to go back and do the exact same ERP exercise again. So the key here really is the response prevention. We can do exposures all day long, but let's be honest, you all know this better than I do. Living with OCD, you're pretty much living with your exposures, right? You're exposed to thoughts, urges, images, triggers, situations, events, memories, whatever it may be that feel like exposures. So the really important piece here is the response prevention. Whatever your compulsive urge to keep going is in relation to any of your academic work, stop yourself short. Prevent that typical safety seeking. Prevent that typical compulsive response. That's how your brain learns that none of this stuff was as scary, as risky, as dire as the OCD tried to make it out to be in the first place. So I do want to be cognizant of the time. We're already at an hour. I think to be fair to everybody here, let me pick out one more question, and then I will have to sign off for the evening. And I'm sorry that I haven't been able to get to all these questions. This happens every time we do the webinars. Please continue to attend, continue to ask your questions. Reach out to us here at NoCD. Our care team, that's our team that fields all the phone calls coming in to the NoCD organization on a daily basis from all over the country, different parts of the world even. They are wonderful people. They will listen to your concerns. They will help you get started on your path to receive effective help to overcome your OCD symptoms or your loved one to overcome their OCD symptoms. So I'll end with this one. Do you need to be 18 or over to video call with a therapist on NoCD? The answer is no. We treat children, adolescents, and adults of all ages. I should let you know the youngest age we go down to for treatment at NoCD is 6 years old. So 6 years old and up, please call us. Have your family call us. You can all call together. Reach out to us. Reach out to the care team at NoCD, and we will get you started on the right path. Keep in mind, in addition to the video calls, the telehealth, the teletherapy services you'll be able to receive with an OCD specialist through NoCD, we have our phenomenal peer advisors as well. You'll have the opportunity to connect with other people who work in our organization who have OCD, who have been through CBT and ERP, and we'll talk to you openly and help you address any of your concerns, doubts, or fears about just engaging in treatment in the first place. There is such effective help out there. Please don't wait any longer. Reach out, start taking the steps to learn how to overcome your OCD. So I am so sorry that we are out of time and I did not get to probably even half the questions here, but like I said, keep tuning in, contact us, ask your questions. We want to help in any way, shape, or form we can. Thank you so much for your time. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.